And what we want to do as European is to develop what we call the European pillar. It is not something external to the NATO. It is something inside the NATO, but allowing European countries to be stronger and to be a strong European pillar inside NATO and to be part of the global ecosystem environment, I would say.
The North Atlantic Treaty Organization has transformed since it was founded by 7 member countries in 1949. It has grown to include 32 members today and faces circumstances that might have seemed unthinkable even 5 years ago, with an intractable war between Ukraine and Russia right on its borders. We know that the U.S. is heavily aiding Ukraine, despite a lot of dispute in Congress, but also experiencing a serious growth of isolationism and concerns about the value that NATO represents. But what do we know about how Europeans feel about this foundational alliance? The EU has absorbed something like 6 million refugees from Ukraine and reports that it has dedicated something like $155 billion in financial and military aid. By contrast, the U.S. has absorbed about 270,000 Ukrainian refugees and has supplied $175 billion in aid. Do Europeans want more involvement from NATO and the US? Or how about increased rapprochement between certain European leaders and Putin? And of course, there is a lot more to the alliance than the Ukraine war. What about, for example, NATO taking on challenges beyond Europe, like in the Middle East and Asia and space? So how can upcoming European elections or other indicators help us understand the state of the transatlantic alliance? Helping us with some answers, or maybe some other questions tonight, are our guests, Mustafa Soykurt, Consul General of France in Boston, and Dr. Sonja Kreibich, Consul General of Germany to the New England States. And hello, everyone. I'm Mary Eintema, President of World Boston, and so happy to welcome you to Great Decisions. Thanks to the Lowell Institute, which generously supports Great Decisions, Chat and Chowder, and the State of the State Department programs. Thanks also to our production partner, GBH Forum Network. Dr. Sonja Kreibich became Consul General of Germany to the New England States in 2022. Before that, she served at the Federal Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Berlin as the head of the Division for Pan-African Issues, Southern Africa and the Great Lakes. Prior to this, she served as head of the Unit for European Migration Policy. Mustafa Soykurt became Consul General of France in Boston, also in 2022. He was previously technical advisor for European affairs for French Prime Ministers Philippe, Castex, and Borne. Before that, he was head of the press service of the French Embassy in Italy and served in the permanent representation of France to the EU. Clearly, we're in very good hands for tonight's discussion. I have a similar question to answer or to think about as we go ahead for both of you, and that is what you want us to know about what's going on in Europe. Mustafa, I think maybe I'll start with you. France, of course, was a founding member of NATO. How focused are the French now on national security as they go to the polls?
First of all, thank you for having me in this particular moment. As you say, we are a few days before an important summit in Washington, which will deal with Ukraine and the security in Europe. But more importantly, we are a few days before the 80th anniversary of the D-Day, when thousands of young Americans came to free my country and Europe. Some of them made the ultimate sacrifice to save our freedom and restore peace. Before we start, please allow me to recognize their courage and express my deepest admiration for the bravery, as we are going to organize in my country, in Normandy, in a few days, a big ceremony with President Biden. Speaking about the situation, it is not only complex, but urgent. We are witnessing a real shift with the return of war in Europe. We used to think that we would never witness war in our continent. We had peace for 75 years after World War II, and we thought it would last forever. we were wrong, because now we have war in our soul in Ukraine. So national security is an important matter, not only for my country, but also for Europe as a global, as a big picture. Because this is not only for my country, this is also for the common security. And what happens now in the frontier in Europe is a danger for us all, not only Europe, but also the world, because we are witnessing a remilitarization of the world. Big powers, Russia, China, just to quote a few of them, are spending a lot of money on defense. And this is also something we should do commonly in Europe, but also inside NATO, to make sure that we will be able to defend ourselves. So yes, defense security is an important matter, and I think it should be for everybody.
And do you think that the French people have security on their minds, or are they more concerned with day-to-day matters, the economy, migration, questions like that?
Actually, I do think that the situation of the world and the situation of Europe is important for the French people. Yes, of course, the domestic issues are important, and they are going to drive a part of the population for the elections. But I am certain that this is also something very important. And this is also the role of our politicians and our president to show that, well, important matters are there. And I think he said it publicly. He said it in interviews in the press. He also said it in the several speeches. The last one is Sorbonne, Discours de la Sorbonne, where he said that, well, this is a very urgent situation, and we should be able, Europe should be able to stand and to defend itself.
Okay, thank you. Sonia, Germany bore a serious burden at the beginning of the war between Russia and Ukraine, relying, of course, heavily on energy, Russian energy, and its economy really suffered, losing several GDP points in a year, which is a lot. What do you think that we Americans need to know about Germans' frame of mind as they go to the polls?
Thank you. As Mustafa said, thank you very much for hosting this event and for inviting us and giving us the opportunity to present sort of the mindset of our governments and our people. And Mustafa mentioned that Russia's attack on Ukraine brought war back to Europe. And this, I will never forget that day. I was at the Foreign Office, and I could see that all the experienced diplomats around me in the room knew that we had woken up in a completely different world. And what we've experienced since then has been a complete turnaround in Germany's and Europe's security and defense policy. We had experienced that privilege of living in unprecedented decades of peace. We had this. We were enjoying this peace dividend, and for very good reasons, European countries also had cut back on their defense spending. We had to turn this around. You also mentioned the challenges that Russia's attack on Ukraine posed on Germany's economy and on our energy supply. So this was a major challenge 2 years ago. I'm proud to say that we managed this immediate challenge of having to wean ourselves completely off Russian gas and in some part also oil. But the war isn't over. The war has been going on for 2 years now, and we know that we have to, well, Germany has to spend more for defense. Europe will have to invest heavily in defense. And we're extremely grateful for our international partners because for Germany, sort of the German mindset as sort of coming out of Second World War is that security is always a collective endeavor. And NATO is at the heart of our collective security mindset. So for us, NATO and cohesion within NATO is essential. And Germany is willing to play its part in this. As to your second question, I think you also asked about how do German voters look towards the European elections. And I looked up some recent polling, and what I found really interesting is that before the last European elections, voters in 2019, for voters, protection of climate and the environment was the most important issue they had identified. And in this year's election, it is peace and security. This is surprising to me because if you look at the sort of the competences of the European Parliament, peace and security is not among the highest ranking, but there has been a clear shift in the perception of the electorate.
Great, thank you. I have to deal with I think almost the elephant in the room. Americans have been somewhat conditioned by the media, by certain politicians, to question this 2% concept, that members of NATO should spend 2% of their GDP on defense. So I'm wondering if either or both of you would like to tackle that. I will note that I was just looking this up. Germany is at 2%. Congratulations. For the first time since 1990. France apparently at 1.4%. The very good news, if you're paying attention to these statistics, is that only 3 members of NATO in 2014 were paying up to that level, and now it's 18. So that tells us something. But does this matter? And what is this requirement about? Should we be so focused on it?
Well, I can speak to your first question. Does it matter? Yes, it does. And Germany is paying our share. We also, for us, it's important to also speak about that because I know of this perception in the US, and we've been blamed repeatedly for not paying our share. So I'm proud to be able to say we are paying our share. We will be spending more than we've ever done in the history of the German armed forces on defense. And we're currently at, I think, 2.1%, but it's sort of the 2% is only one part of the story. It's also about how this translates into contributions and capabilities. And in this and in the development of a defense sector in general in Germany, in Europe, and in procurement. And just some additional figures, we have opened new production lines in Germany. We are buying additional defense equipment in Europe, but also in the US. And with US defense companies alone, Germany has currently around 380 contracts with a total value of around $23 billion in defense spending that are ongoing. So I think we are doing our part, but as I mentioned in the beginning, sort of one of the results of the peace dividend that we had in Europe was that we had good reasons for reducing our defense spending, and to manage that turnaround, it's not an easy process because it's also a political process. You have to convince your electorate that you have to spend on defense, and we are currently managing this sort of outside of the regular budget, but in future years, this will have to come out of the regular budget. So we will have pretty hard negotiations in Parliament about allocation of budgets.
Okay, thank you. And how does this look from the French perspective, Mustafa?
Well, we are not far from the 2% target, I have to say, and just to give some figures, we, as my president said it already, but I'm going to repeat it. We have doubled. France has doubled its defense budget, and we are spending more. But figures are not representative of the whole picture. You have to see also the involvement in the country for the common defense. And for this, you have to see if the country is on the field. And I have to say my country is. France is present in Estonia, in the frontier with Russia. We have a battalion in Romania, and our military forces joined the NATO forces as a member of NATO. And our aircraft, the Charles de Gaulle, for example, operates with American forces. So yes, we are truly part of it. We spend more and we act in the field. And I have to say, to conclude my point, is that we spend also a lot of money on nuclear because we are a nuclear power. Right. And we were on the side of the United States in Afghanistan, in the Middle East, also in Africa, where we did our part of the share. But what I have to say is, an alliance is also a group, and you have to be part of the group and to coordinate the group. And this is what we expect from NATO and from the United States, is to be the leader of this coordination and to be as it is now. It was not the case always in the past, but now it is really the case. For example, you can see an excellent coordination in Ukraine. And this is also the leading role of the United States, not when it decides without telling anyone to leave Syria, but now when it is the common motor, the common engine to have everybody with the United States inside NATO. And what we want to do as European is to develop what we call the European pillar. It is not something external to the NATO. It is something inside the NATO, but allowing European countries to be stronger and to be a strong European pillar inside NATO and to be part of the global ecosystem environment, I would say.
So it would be, I'm not familiar with this. This would be under NATO command.
Yes. Inside.
Interesting. Okay. Well, actually, Mustafa, you just touched on a point that I've been curious about. Obviously, these things go up and down, but there is a certain amount of anti-American sentiment in Europe. For whatever reason, that is the case. Could you ever see, either of you, could you ever see the Supreme Allied Command moving away from the United States? Because by tradition, so the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO has always been American.
Well, actually, this I don't know. I am not that familiar with these issues. But okay. What I know is that there is, and right now there is also this coordination. It is not a question of nationality, I would say. It is a question of cooperation and coordination inside NATO and allowing everybody to be member of it. And I see that we have this dynamism. For example, when you see the development of NATO now, we have inside NATO countries like Finland, like Sweden, new members. Mm-hmm. And so NATO is growing. So it is becoming more and more important. So you need more and more coordination inside of it. Mm-hmm. And this is what my feeling is, that this is something we have to develop and to make sure that everybody is part of it. And when you are part of it, of this dynamic, so you will be able to share, to stand more, and to be parts of your own defense and not ask others to defend you.
Well, if people are not talking about that, that's interesting, because and I know it wouldn't necessarily be any country's decision, but that would seem to me to be a potential target for anti-American sentiment. Let's
let's be very clear. There is no anti-American sentiment in Europe. I speak for my country, but I was also in Brussels and in other European countries, and the sentiment towards the United States is everybody in Europe is very close to the United States and is willing to develop and coordinate more and more. And there is this willingness to have this cooperation. I didn't see it. Maybe somebody is going to tell me wrong, but I didn't see an anti-Americanism. There is sometimes criticism. Let's be clear. There is always criticism, even in our own country, against our own politicians. So criticism doesn't mean you are somebody. Mm-hmm. It is questions, but there is no anti-American feelings in my country, at least.
Okay, wonderful. Sonia, did you have any comments on that matter?
Maybe I would frame it a bit differently. You asked about sort of moving Allied command, moving NATO command. I think it is at least speaking for Germany, Germany is incredibly grateful for the security umbrella that the US has offered over the last decades. And we know that was the guarantee for Germany's security during Cold War years. And later on, it wasn't as important anymore, but now we see how important it is. And of course, sort of we hope that this transatlantic partnership can be maintained also on the basis of joint values and joint interests. But at the same time, I mean, some of this is also a decision that US voters will have to take. But we also know that with the multitude of crises that we see all around the world, the institutional setup and the different parts of engagement of NATO partners in Europe will probably shift over the years. It's something that everybody expects, and I think everybody in Europe, at least in Germany, knows that sort of if you look at it's a kind of it's a scale, and the weight that Europeans will have to put into that transatlantic security partnership will probably have to go up over the next years. How this will look like in practice, I don't know yet. So these are discussions that are happening, and as I said, it will also depend on political developments in the US. But in a way, Europe and Germany are preparing for this sort of on the basis of this acknowledgement that Europe will have to do more to also defend itself. And Mustafa mentioned the European pillar within NATO. It's also within the European Union. Many important decisions are being taken to facilitate defense procurement within Europe, because some of the rules that we have currently are still quite bizarre. Sort of there is no common market for military procurement in Europe. So there are decisions that we can take on the EU side to make things easier.
Okay, great. Thank you. As I said, this is a massive set of questions. We're already getting some good ones from our participants, but I do want to give you both a chance to talk a bit about the rise of the far right and populism, massive topic, and one person's far right is another person's center, but even so, what does this trend mean, or potentially mean, for the transatlantic alliance? There's a massive question to tackle.
there is a great number of parties in Germany that run for the European election, and it's up to the voters to decide how the German sort of contingent within the European Parliament will look like. But one thing that a big question and also a reason for worry is sort of how the future balance will look like between parties that support the European idea in general, sort of this European idea of ideal of working together and moving towards an ever closer union. And I would also subsume under that sort of that who also support this ideal of a rules-based international order and working together with your most important internet allies on the questions of peace and security. That's sort of the one group. And then there are other parties who openly question the European idea, the idea of European integration, and who also have different ideas of who your most important allies beyond Europe would look like. So that's sort of the key question of sort of, if you look at the election results after next weekend, we will see sort of how strongly the future European Parliament still subscribes sort of to this traditional way of seeing Europe and seeing collaboration in a rules-based international order.
Okay, great. I see we have Jim Kaufman here ready with his question. Jim, do you want to go ahead?
Thank you, Mary, and thank you to both of our guest panelists for joining World Boston. Much appreciated. So Mary touched in part on my question, but my question is, the prior U.S. administration included rhetoric that demeaned the value of NATO. Some dismiss that as behavior as simply a tactic to pressure Europeans to spend more on its military. Whether that's an accurate read or not, has that shaken your country's confidence that the U.S. will always stand with NATO? And if that confidence has been challenged, is that now pushing European countries to seek political alliances separate from the long-standing transatlantic relationship, such as toward China or others? Is there a new calculus being worked on?
For the new alliances, I don't see any change of the structural alliance between Europe and the United States. And right now, when you look at France or Germany and the European countries, we are side by side with the United States, and we consider China and Russia as not allies and not friends. Russia is in war in Ukraine, and China can have strong positions. We do not agree with, and we are in a connection because this is what diplomats do. We do talk with everybody, especially China, but it doesn't mean that we are not with the United States. We are inside NATO, we are allies, and it doesn't change. So, and for the rest, for the NATO itself, inside NATO, we can have issues. We cannot agree on everything. My president said in 2019 that NATO was brain dead. And we saw from that point to now that it was a wake-up call. It made a change, and now we have a better cooperation. So you can have disagreement between allies, but you stay in the same group as allies. And that doesn't mean that you are going to change and to shift and to go with other countries.
There was also a question about Article 5 and sort of whether Europe still believes that the US would be there sort of as a partner of last resort. Of course, Germans have taken a very close look at what Article 5 actually means, and we see that there are different ways of interpreting it, and this is no absolute guarantee that even in the best of worlds, it's no absolute guarantee that the US would always come to Europe's rescue. But yes, we're looking at it, and I think there has been reason to look at it in a closer way.
One of the things that you need, of course, and that everybody seemed to realize is when Putin attacked Ukraine is that everybody realized that we all needed to have a better defense industry. Germany seems to be hidebound by a lot of bureaucracy. There was a report recently that the French foreign defense minister was attacking the industry, saying it wasn't producing enough. Have either of these two questions been addressed, both of which affect the amount of arms and ammunitions that you can bring to bear on the battlefield? Have those been addressed?
Yes, I mentioned that in the beginning. The challenge in Europe still is that we basically sort of each European nation has their own defense industry, and it's not really sort of collaboration is still very patchy. So, but I also mentioned that at the European Union level, measures have been taken for the reinforcement of a European defense industry through common procurement. That was one measure, and also half €500 million has been provided to ramp up ammunition production within Europe. So these are two measures that have been taken in the framework of the common security and defense policy, which is sort of the defense arm of the European Union, to address these issues. But as it stands now, it's still very patchy and very complicated to work, because sort of I think I'm not a military expert, but you can have like 30 different specifications for one type of helicopter or tank, because it's all sort of specially made for one member state and not for the other. And also, it's actually also a major challenge for the Ukrainian military, because they get all this military equipment from Europe, but then they can't use them interchangeably.
What we did with the Ukraine war is that we have several industries in my country. What we did is that we asked them to produce more. So produce more ammunitions, produce more. I don't know how to say it in English, but we did provide some kind of ammunition to Ukraine, and we want to produce more of them. And this is the first step. The second is that we are developing, especially with Germany, a common tank, and we are working on this. This is something we want to develop further. And yes, as Sonia said, we are also developing a European structure, a European framework to develop the ammunition system, the European ammunition system, and then we will be able to put all this and to be able to increase our strength.
And thank you for the opportunity to ask my question to the two ambassadors or consul generals. My question is, what will your governments do, or what do you foresee your governments doing to avoid what certain strategic realists, such as Professor Jeffrey Sachs and former Ambassador Chaz Freeman, as well as MIT's Ted Postol, have said in the past week? I was on several webinars like this with these individuals. They say there's a greater threat of extending the war into a nuclear superpower confrontation due to the fact that NATO is providing cover or intelligence reconnaissance for no less than 3 drone strikes on the early warning system of Russia. And this all happened in the past week. What do you foresee your governments doing to prevent this wider war, as these strategic realists have characterized it, from breaking out? Thank you.
When we are in a confrontation like this, of course, and from the beginning, Russia is talking about nuclear threat, reminding us that it is a nuclear power, and that is the truth, and saying that it will be able to use its nuclear power. To what several leaders said that Russia is not the only nuclear power in the world, and others also have this power, I would say. And I think that this is the way you do when you want the others to fear you. But for the moment, there was no signal, no sign from Russia that it is going to use its nuclear power. For the moment, it is just well, observation or declaration speeches, and well, of course, we are witnessing it. I think that we have to be serious. We have to take into consideration these facts, but at the same time, for the moment, there is no this kind of signal. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm going to be. I don't have all the information, but for the moment, I don't see it.
As an avid reader of The Economist, they've been speaking recently about how free trade and the World Trade Organization and everything that brought a lot of prosperity to everyone seems to be endangered. And Europe is basically the two main presidential candidates to be competing each other, the higher tariffs they'll put here in the United States. I'm also seeing that in China. It said that Europe is one of the few seems to still be committed to free trade. Do you see that Europe can help, lead that? As I'm personally a very big free trader, so I see the benefits of it. Do you see Europe helping lead that, or should that so much to lead us to preserve it, what we have now? Merci, vielen Dank.
What I can say is that at least the European Commission that we have today, and that we will also get a new European Commission after the European elections. But as it stands now, the European Commission is a huge defender of free trade, and Europe as a political bloc is also an excellent example of the benefits of free trade and economic integration. So yes, we would hope that this idea survives also the cycle of elections. Germany as an export-driven economy also depends on the possibility to trade with other nations, and I think it's no secret that measures like the IRA that the US has taken German industry was not so happy about it because it limited trade and it limited our economic opportunities. So just a few comments from the German side.
And I have to say that at the European side, we decided to bring new measures in order to be able to defend ourselves against countries like China, where they support the industry, they give incentives and they pay for the industry, and they do not respect the rules of the free trade. So at the beginning, free trade is okay if everybody respects the same rules. If they do not, you have to be able to put some limitations and force them to respect the common ground, the common rules, what they call the level playing field in Brussels. So this is what we are trying to do. Let's see. But yes, we are fully in favor of free trade. We think that it is positive for the international relations, but not at any expense.
We mentioned obviously the influx of refugees, but that's a different matter potentially. Some people believe that the increase in immigration in Europe has really fueled the rise of the far right. I'm wondering if you see any positive developments coming from this apparently landmark bill last week to allow member states to essentially for the European Union to cooperate within itself to manage asylum seekers, and if that will potentially lower temperatures around the question of migration.
Maybe I start because I spent 5 years of my professional life working on this, and until I left in it towards a different field, and I was actually happy that I left because it is a pretty intractable political field. I don't think that it is going to be a major change, but on the other hand, it's extremely good that the European member states have finally come together, because this reform of the European asylum system has been more than 10 years in the making now. So it's been extremely painful, and we lived through that, through the big migration crises in 2015 and 16, where we saw that the previous system was not functional, and countries that were receiving the major share of asylum seekers in Europe, like Germany, pointed out that we need to find a new system that on the one hand takes into account the interests of receiving countries, but it also takes into account the interests of countries at the outside external borders of the European Union, like Italy and Greece, which through the geographic setup are sort of the countries of first line of receiving them. So it's been a very long and painful process with a very typically European compromise at the end. But what we've also seen is that migration has, well, it has become a major mobilizing issue, particularly for parties on the right end of the spectrum. So the rise of the Alternative für Deutschland, the AfD in Germany, but they rose to political relevance on the migration issue. So we will see whether, I don't think that having this adopted and enforced will not make a major political change, and we will have to see how it plays out in practice.
On this, I think we made a major step. It was a political step because we showed cooperation and coordination, and also solidarity with every member states in the EU. What is the problem? What was the problem? The problem was, as Sonia mentioned, the fact that some countries, some member states that are in the borders were having a lot of migrants, and they felt abandoned by the rest of member states because they were saying, we receive them and we receive so few help. So we need more help in order to take them into our countries. And on the other side, you have countries that did not want migrants in their territory. And in the middle of this, you have countries like Germany, like France. There were countries where those migrants wanted to go. So now, what did we do? We set a border. We said that every people that comes in the EU has to be registered. If you can go in because you are asylum seeker, you can go, you can check. And if you have no right to stay, then you have to go back in your country. And the political message was, there is solidarity inside the EU. So we are going to help member states that need help. This is the first one. And we are going to share the burden. This is the second message. And even though the full system is not perfect, at least it is something that represents a step forward. And this is something, I think, because of course you have to find a balanced solution for every member state, but I think it was a good step in the right direction.
So I just want to say first that I realize it's Putin's fault that this war started. I don't have an issue with helping in Ukraine. The Ukrainian people have suffered tremendously. But when I hear about the talk about increasing the defense spending as such, I find it very depressing in the sense that when you look at what is happening with climate change, this is not really where we should be spending money. This is not really where we should be spending our intellectual resources on ways to do drone warfare. And, and even just the environmental toll of the manufacturing of all of these weapons and then using these weapons. So much Ukraine's agricultural land is poisoned for years and years and years because of all of the landmines and such. So I find that depressing. And then, the NATO members, they have significant coastline. France, Germany, the UK are actual islands and such. And so with the sea level changes, for instance, and such, there's so much money that's going to need to be spent on that. And realistically, is it possible to be able to spend 2%, 4%, whatever on defense and also secure the coastlines and all the other work that needs to be done for climate change, where you're really talking about, 5 years, 6 years, maybe 10 years at most and such. And
Sure.
then does NATO see the battle against climate change as part of its defense mandate? Is that a way that they could take the money going into it and then apply it to climate change?
Great.
What are your thoughts on that?
A real
If I
trade-off.
can,
And as I just want to point out that Sonia was saying before we got started, I think maybe we had already started that priorities of voters in polls have really shifted from 5 years ago. The last election was 5 years ago, which is a long time these days. Have shifted from energy and climate to peace and security. So can you do both?
Because the situation has changed. I think everybody fully agrees with Christina. Everybody wanted to spend more money on climate change, and it was the priority of this actual commission. It was climate change, but the big difference between 5 years ago and now is the war in Ukraine. And if you do not take into account the real situation on the field in Ukraine, that means you are missing something. You are missing the elephant in the room, war. And if you want to preserve peace in Europe, you have to be able to defend yourself. So, do we agree with Christina? Should we spend more money on climate change, on clean energies? I fully agree, and I think everybody fully agrees, even Ukrainians. But it is not Ukrainians' fault if there is a war, and not seeing the reality is something dangerous, I think.
Maybe just, I fully agree. I think we didn't choose that war, and we also we are worried about shifting priorities. One positive element is I mentioned in the beginning that Germany had to also sort of manage a complete turnaround in our energy supply, and we used that 2 years ago to also invest even more heavily in renewable energy, and so that at least some part of the Russian gas that we were no longer able to import would not be needed anymore. And we have seen we have really seen some significant success in this. So a crisis can also be used to innovate things, but we also see that it's increasingly difficult to advocate for climate-friendly policies and sustainable policies, particularly if they cost something and if they cost the citizens something. Because,
kind of asked my questions about migration and climate change a little bit earlier. So I wanted to change to another separate question about humanitarian efforts for the EU and your countries about, whether it's Ukraine or the situation in Israel and Gaza or the wars in Africa. And in terms of your country's contributions in supporting displacement of people and humanitarian efforts as wars as raging in all fronts. Thank you.
I can say something to that, because I think we're coming back we're always coming back to a similar issue, which is sort of an increasing fight over public resources. And as a very concrete example, Germany is currently in the process of sort of starting to set up its new government budget for next year. And we have set ourselves very strict limits on deficit spending. So we are currently having this discussion within the German government on whether and possibly where to cut. And it has been suggested that Germany cuts the spending on humanitarian aid, for example. My ministry, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, is definitely not in favor, because we see that the world is not getting a more peaceful place. It's getting an even more dangerous place for many people around the world. And we still subscribe to the basic principles of humanitarian aid, that humanitarian aid has to go to those in need and irrespective of sort of political considerations. So we are fighting hard to maintain that that budgetary leverage and our budgetary possibilities, but we also see that demands are rather increasing. You mentioned Ukraine. I just wanted to mention that part of what Germany is doing, I spoke about our increased contributions to NATO, but of course we are also massively supporting Ukraine, not only militarily, but also in the civilian sphere. And just in a few days, Germany will host this year's Ukraine Recovery Conference. It's the first type of that conference that will be hosted in an EU member state, where we will bring together 1,500 actors, and the objective is to help Ukraine's civilian recovery and once the war is over. Because we see that this will be an enormous demand, and it's also going to be an enormous challenge for Europe.
Great, thank you.
And I have to say that from the beginning, it was also something that the European Union, but also member states inside the EU have done a lot, is to help and to welcome migrants and families, mothers, daughters, children, all people coming from Ukraine, and to have them in Europe. So Poland did a lot, Germany also, and other European countries also. And this is, well, for the receiving people from Ukraine, and also the help from the European Union and the member states to help and support Ukraine militarily, but not only.
I think, unfortunately, we have run out of time, but we have not run out of questions, which maybe is a good sign. Thank you very much to both of our guests for a really comprehensive discussion on many different aspects of European reality today, with many similarities to what we're facing in the United States, it seems. In any case, thank you all. Have a great night.